Hi everyone, welcome back. Thank you to Ramy and IMI for that session, which they kindly sponsored. Now we have a session about when payments, messaging, and mobile identity all interconnect. And to moderate the session, I'm now introducing Jason Pareja, who I know from my past life at Telefonica, where he led the messaging business for Movistar Peru. And he's now also a product manager at B89, a fintech in Peru as well. So he's bringing his experience to moderate this session. Hi, Jason.
Hi, Mitch. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Good to see you. I'll leave you to introduce your fellow speakers and have a great session.
Great. Thank you, Mitch. Well, guys, welcome everyone joining us from across the world in the Mobile Ecosystem Forum Connects Latin America. My name is Jason Pareja, and as Mitch said before, I am Product Development Manager at B89, the first Peruvian neobank. I'm thrilled to be joined by remarkable digital experts who will share their talks about this session, when messaging, payments, and digital identity meet. I will be moderating today's session with brilliant panelists, starting with Breno Pilar, Vice President at Ipification, Ramy Riad, Vice President Future Messaging at imimobile, Sean Whitley, Vice President of Sales at Mitto, and last but not least, Becker, CEO at Identity Praxis. We will start with a few questions and then open up for the audience Q&A. Without further ado, let's begin. Okay, we're going to start with some examples of how payments and messaging are starting to overlap. Okay, and we would like to have the first talks with Ramy or Michael, guys.
Michael, I think you were speaking on mute.
Oops, I was. Sorry about that. Ramy, why don't you kick us off?
So really the conversion of messaging and payments has been really interesting, where we see both ends of the spectrum, where SMS is really not integrated at all, where we have just a link and a message that takes you to a payments website. We have on the far other side of it is WeChat, where everything is integrated into the messaging application, from payments, transfers, and so on. And we're seeing really a shift in messaging channels where they're starting to adopt payments as integrated part of it. And a good example of that is Apple Business Chat, where now you can complete an end-to-end transaction within the Apple Business Chat conversation with an enterprise using Apple Pay. We're going to see more and more of that. More of these channels start to adopt payments as an integrated solution. And we've seen talks about WhatsApp integrating payments as well into their messaging channels. So we're seeing more of these channels now adopt a native payment method inside the messaging conversation.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think you're raising some really important points. One is this, I think it's important for us to talk about what we mean by integrated. Because in the example you used earlier, one could argue that including a link in the SMS is integrated. The experience works, right? I get a message, I can click on a link, I go to a web browser that works well on my device, and I can complete the payment. I think what you're referring to in that kind of continuum of payment to messaging integration is the goal is to keep the consumer in a consistent, branded, seamless experience. And so there's levels of integration. There's the technical, minimally viable, what I'll call patient on the incubator integration. It's alive, but not necessarily having this happy path, holistic, seamless, integrated experience. To the opposite of spectrum, using the WeChat example, which frankly is a fully integrated platform OS in its own right, you can have that complete immersive standalone independent experience. And I think that's a really key message that I wanted to reinforce that you just said. The other thing that I think we want to realize and remember is that in the age of the connected individual, when an individual has a device, whether or not that's a watch or a phone or a tablet or whatever their mobile device may be of choice at the given moment. At that moment, at that zero moment of truth, which is often referred to in marketing, the consumer is the point of sale. Yeah, and that message that you're presenting to them is your moment of truth. And so, Procter & Gamble, arguably the largest CPG brand worldwide in terms of advertising dollars, just this morning they announced they are now the largest brand again with 11+ billion in advertising spend every day. They often talked about that zero moment of truth. When I'm standing there in front of the shelf and I'm looking at that product, am I ready to buy it? And I think that's a critical point that we need to consider when payments meets messaging, is that the consumer is the point of sale. And at that moment, are you ready to convert them and provide them that experience of a trusted experience and environment which will help them engage and be willing to pay you?
That's great. Breno, Sean, any to add?
Hi, guys. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, MEF LATAM, for inviting us. My contribution is we have been working to make authentication something easier and to make the user free to decide whatever they want with safety and private. So the messaging for us, it's a way to notification, not to authentication. But even though we have been seeing that messaging have been used as authentication, and we do expect this change in the next years or in the next months. But even though everyone have been doing the best to make it happen, and this is important. So thank you for being participate here, and I hope we can really find which are the way to offer privacy and security for the end user, because in fact, they don't need to know anything about privacy and security. They just need to follow their lives and be happy. And we are the experts and we need to provide them that. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, and what I would add is, so in my business, we're doing a lot of the actual messaging on behalf of these brands, essentially becoming the channel and helping them, use the different channels and seeing the comparisons. But to Michael's point, WeChat has been doing this for quite a while, and what we're seeing is a greater need and adoption through the other players in the space. And so when we did a recent survey of consumers on a global scale, looking specifically at the LATAM market, we've actually seen in Brazil, it's about 60% of the respondents said that they've been using OTT and other chat apps at a higher frequency than they did prior to the pandemic. And at the same time, more than 50% of the audience globally expects the brands to be utilizing the channels digitally and engaging through those channels at a higher frequency than they did even during the pandemic. Their expectations have been raised. So when we talk about consistent branded experience across the board, no matter what channel we're talking about, these brands need to think about the user and what they're going through so that at the moment they are ready to buy, it's convenient for them, not just even clicking the link can be too much of a hurdle in some cases, depending on what price point we're talking about. So from our perspective, we're seeing an increase in adoption. We're seeing an increase in demand and requests for these types of use cases. And we're very excited to see where it goes.
Awesome reflections, guys. Before moving to the next question in this group discussion, I want to remind our audience that they can start putting their questions in the chat. Okay, let's move. The next question is if you guys can give us examples of alternative payment methods in emerging markets. We can start with some. Sean?
Yeah, I think the biggest example that I can think of is a customer support agent is currently having a two-way conversation with the end user. And let's say it's through WhatsApp, for example. And to be able to tell them about their product or service, and then the user is interested and wants to move forward, but doesn't have an easy way to just like send them an ability to make a purchase right there or make the payment within that conversation that they're having. But soon to be happening. That's definitely a big use case. We have a lot of e-commerce brands that their support agents are helping answer questions about products, and they get them to that point that they decide, okay, I'm ready to buy. And it's not as seamless as like, here's a link that immediately sets you up with it in the cart, ready to pay. So that's kind of where it's evolving to. And I'm glad to see that WhatsApp's, moving into the payment capabilities and opening that up.
Great. Ramy, we can go with you. I think you're on mute, Ramy.
I think what Sean was saying earlier is that as we're seeing more of these commerce enterprises and businesses adopt these new channels, they're bringing more use cases to the table and trying to use some of the native capabilities of the channels. We've seen direct carrier billing in the past, we've seen card on file, but really what's resonating with the users are the native integrations inside these channels. So and the price point makes a difference. If you're buying something for $1 versus buying something for $1,000, makes the hesitancy less on the user side to complete the purchase within the messaging conversation. And a lot of these conversations are coming also from proactive reach out from the enterprises. So an example that you see is that customer has something going on with their account, and then the customer care is reaching out saying, we've noticed, let's say your bill is going to go over this month. Do you want to add that add-on plan now? The customer can confirm in that messaging channel really what they're trying to do and move forward with that seamlessly and not disrupt whatever they were doing.
So I think you've just raised a really important point. And it's so easy to look at payments as a transactional one-off event, that micro moment, if you will. But really what you're talking about is this intimate workflow between me and the relationship I'm having with the brand. And that could happen at any point in time. So as I noted before, if I'm surfing, if I'm receiving some like interactive chat where I'm exploring a product and I'm at that early awareness stage of the product, well, I very well could go from awareness to purchase nearly instantaneously. So that's the moment of truth. So you'll include that embedded link and or immersive payment experience for me. But as I'm going through that point, right at that moment where I'm about to make a purchase, I may want to connect with support. Oh, wait a minute. I want to make sure that this thing I'm about to buy meets this one really important requirement to me. So I check with the chat app and the agent says, yes, it does. No problem. So then I make the purchase. And then during that process, I may then very quickly go into some adoption stage and then into a support stage and then eventually a loyalty stage. And the ability for your business to kind of understand where I'm in that relationship cycle with you is absolutely critical as we go forward. And in order to be able to make that successfully happen, we're going to really need to think about what is your customer data platform strategy. How are you going to integrate those real-time micro moments with the insight that you have about that individual to in real time to be able to personalize that experience for them. So these are all kind of the next cutting edge activities that we'll need to consider and how we undertake as we move this forward with this model of integrating payments and that payment experience with messaging.
Yeah, so just to comment on that real quick, we really call that a connected journey. It's really from acquisition all the way to retention. It's one journey for the enterprise. And it's really, like you were saying, Michael, every piece of that, the customer moves from one point to the other very quickly, and they can go back and forth in that journey by buying another product, coming back, and so on. So it's really becoming one big journey, and we're seeing the different departments within the organization converge. And as that conversion area starts to grow bigger and bigger, that connected journey becomes more and more important.
Yeah, and
yes, I would like to add something, Michael and Ramy. Is it okay for you?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go.
Yeah, I agree with all comments, and I think really we do great to be thinking and speaking about it. And I would like to offer an idea that for me, it's all about user experience. Because of course, if we do our job well done, the user experience will be transparent for the end user. And I think this is our goal. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree, but I just wanted to. I don't want to throw the proverbial monkey in the in the wrench in the monkey in the wrench middle, or I don't know, a problem. I don't want to create too much friction in the problem. But the one thing I want to raise here is, first and foremost, this connected journey I think is critically important. But every friction point along the way that you have in that journey, aka to what you're mentioning, this seamless connected customer experience. Is critical, and if you have any of those friction points, that's a point for your customer to drop off. That's a point for you to create dissatisfaction, to develop a potentially an implication of mistrust. And I think one of the biggest challenges we have is not in the conceptual concept of the connected frictionless journey, but in the actual implementation of it, because for today, so many of the way our organizations are structured, IT is an independent silo running the payments infrastructure. But on the other side, where on the other side, the group that understands me and appreciates me and gets my emotions and what I want to be doing is on the marketing side, which is often in a completely different MarTech stack. And so I think one of the biggest objectives companies are going to have is, how do you truly create that consolidated, automated view of the individual that you're of service to, and to basically get IT and marketing to play together. And I know that sounds super easy, but it's not. In many corporate cultures, it could be very, very difficult because of legacy, not just because of a corporate culture issue, but possibly just because of legacy systems issues. And so these are very difficult and challenging problems that companies need to overcome. So it's not just a matter of, here's the new messaging infrastructure that, say, a WhatsApp is providing us, but how do we actually implement and engineer our back-end systems to actually enable us to be able to take advantage of that? So I think we lost Jason. There you go.
I'm here. Okay, great, guys. Before moving to the Q&A, I have a last but not least question. I would like to know what you think about how privacy and security concerns overlay the payment and messaging ecosystem. We can start with Michael.
It's probably the most important question we can be talking about in this panel and in all panels going forward. Right now, we are witnessing a fundamental change in the world's economies that is being driven by this concept of privacy, that's being driven by this concept of agency and self-sovereign identity. Today, or in 2020, roughly 10% of the world's population was covered by a privacy regulation. By 2023, Gartner predicts that 65% of the world's population would be covered by privacy regulations. What that means is, I as a user have agency and control over my data. What that means is, you as a business need to understand how, we just talked about this idea of having personalized consumer seamless experience is critical for successful payments to messaging integration. But the only way you're going to get that is through data and effectively using and managing that data for me. And I think there's a digital sovereignty triad that every business needs to consider when they're moving forward with what we're talking about. And that's privacy, security, and compliance. So privacy, to be very clear on the definition, is the ability for an individual to control the who, what, when, where, for what purpose, and for how long someone has access to my information to be able to engage and interact with me. Security is about the authorization and access controls to determine who within the organization actually has access to that information. And that who may be an AI. It doesn't necessarily need to be a human being. And then finally, compliance is essentially the rules of the road. Basically the policies, the law, and the regulations that we as society are laying down to determine how and when that privacy and security elements play themselves out. And as an organization, we need to be pulling those three levers to be able to successfully make all of this happen. So those are my views on this. And it's critically important that we recognize this, because the companies that do this well are going to be the companies that differentiate themselves between those that treat me as a sovereign individual and that those that do not. And eventually I will pay my share of wallet is going to go to those people that I can trust and that I believe will actually respect me.
Great. We can move with Breno?
Thank you, Jason. In our company, we have a singular approach that we think the information of the individual should not be exchanged. And in security, it's well known that as much people has access to the information, it's more hard to protect it. So we think like the MNOs, the mobile network operators, should be the owner of this data with the allowance of the user. And in our case, our approach, we don't use their information. We never let this information come out of the network of the MNO. So this was the way we found to not to protect the information. It's as less we expose or we use or we touch the individual information, it's better. So in our opinion, a way to solve that, it's centralized point authorized to manage the individual's information. And definitely, as much people have access to the information, harder to protect it. So for us, privacy is to let the individual to decide what they're gonna do with their information, for whom they're gonna share it, and as less as better. Minus is more, in our opinion. So for us, privacy is to let converge all this information in one single point that is, in our opinion, it's the mobile network operators that in any case, they already has the people information. So if we just use this information inside their network as we do, it's our approach, less issues we're gonna have with privacy. But
So
it's definitely a hard thing to solve.
I'd like to challenge this a little bit in that when we look at the way when you're referring to information in this context, I believe what you're referring to is the know your customer identity verification of me as an individual for me to be able to make that transaction, for me to be able to purchase that. I completely agree with you within that context. The mechanisms we use to resolve identity are absolutely critical in this stage. And there's some emerging technologies like self-sovereign identity and verified credentials that could in fact be overlaid within the carrier network to make that successful. Very similar to the models which you guys are doing.
Ipification,
but
yes.
However, in the context of making a commercial transaction and in the marketing and in the positioning and in the shelf, the various elements of the mechanisms of doing that, the brand themselves have significantly more information than the carriers do, and they're not going to want to give that information to the carriers because, for example, Procter & Gamble, the reference of a brand I referred to earlier, has a customer data database of over 1.5 billion people, and all of their interests and their profiles and the information that they know about that individual and what they want to be selling to that individual at the time. So when we talk about data, it's not just about resolving identity and who I am to be able to actually facilitate that purchase. It's all about also all of the other data to be able to, one, help me make the specific purchase I may be looking at in the context of the messaging. But going back to the comment earlier, I believe it was Sean that brought it up. Maybe you're in that support call and you're going to get an upsell. By the way, if you're buying this, you may also want to get this dongle too, right? Mm-hmm. Well, the only person that's going to know that is the brand, not the carrier.
Definitely, Michael, if you allowed me a comment.
It's really important to bring these two different data sets together and do it in a sovereign way.
Yeah, your example is pretty good. But I would like to mention, like, to authenticate a user and identify him to access the app, we don't exchange this information with nobody else. But then the app, after identify this client, can get as much information as they can, and they will not need to exchange either. So if we stop to exchange information with third party, it will be a huge advance, in my opinion. And definitely, it's a huge problem to take care of. But the direction is stop to exchange information of third party without the consent. This is the worst that it's happening so far.
Yeah, I agree. I think at the end of the day, though, if we fast forward 3-4 years from now, possibly 5 at the latest, and I'm just going to jump to the answer, and then we can argue that for the next decade, is the only place where this information should reside is with the individual. And even it doesn't necessarily need to be at the brand. At best, it's co-owned between the brand and the individual, and it most certainly doesn't need to be with any third party. And I believe the future of messaging networks are going to be such that basically digital sovereignty APIs will open up that will allow my profile, my interests, my data to be actually pulled programmatically in real time from me and my personal data store, which will then locally facilitate the ability for this messaging to be enriched and to be able to have these kind of really hyper personalized, internet of me like experiences in real time. Which is what the messaging experience requires. And we don't have enough time. That's a whole other panel we can talk about, possibly have an entire, other Connect event about it. But that's eventually where I see this going.
Perfect. Ramy and Sean, do you have any reflections from your side?
Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, my background, I come from a telecommunications provider that focused mostly on security use cases. So it was big in using the SMS channel for one-time PIN code authentication. But obviously, that's just one step, and there's been such an evolution in ways to authenticate, different modes, modalities, and obviously like the different channels that are available. The one thing I think is interesting when you talk about having a centralized way to authenticate this identity and relying on the mobile carriers or mobile network operators for this. I mean, the only thing is obviously this needs to evolve further. I'm not trying to throw out any sort of hot take here and ruffle anybody's feathers, but I mean, there was a recent breach that was just acknowledged this week by a mobile network operator that, had access to consumers' information, social security numbers, et cetera. So this is where it gets tricky. And this is why it's such an important topic to talk about, as you said, Michael, because at the end of the day, we need to make sure that not only do users feel comfortable using our service and having a good experience, but they shouldn't even be thinking about the security concerns, identity concerns. It should be seamless in the background, but it should be done eloquently. And yeah, I mean, I just think there's ways today to address it. The KYC stuff, I always talk about like KYP, which is know your phone. If we're using that as an identifier for these messaging apps, we should be able to use mobile intelligence with the operators around, is the number active? Is it roaming? Has there been a SIM swap or any sort of porting event? Has it been recently deactivated? To understand that this identity is still assured from the point of registration to the last transaction to this current transaction over time. So, I mean, that's just kind of some of my experience to throw into this conversation.
Right, but again, that's all fascinating and absolutely has to be addressed with. But from the customer experience perspective, to your point, the customer doesn't want to know any of that. That should all just be assumed, right? So the fact that
this is my point, Michael.
Yeah, the fact that I'm in my messaging app, whether or not it's SMS or a OTT experience, the app itself and or the digital protocols that are being used to be linking me within the payment systems, all of that should be transparent, trusted, encrypted, and secured. And within that method, my identity should be verified. That's table stakes, and that's Ipification is
100%.
Is one of the players that can help make that kind of thing happen.
Definitely, thank you.
But on that note, that's transactional, right? What about knowing me as a user? What about making sure that you're presenting me with the right product? What about or bundles of products? That all of that other information is really, in some respects, nothing to do with identity, other than and frankly, all of those attributes about me, again, to your point, can lead to verification of identity, right? So, for example, there are failure points in an identity where you think you know me because I've used the appropriate credentials, but if my phone is 2,000 miles away from my physical point, then that's a fraud trigger which then can be used to stop the identification. Again, that's still the identification perspective. It doesn't address the issue of how do you use all of my personal information in a transparent, effective, and trusted way to make sure I'm actually getting the best product and service from you.
Michael, just a comment. But right now, you can use a third-party phone to make your authentication. You don't need even to have the correct phone number that you are saying so. So definitely, we have to think about, to speak about, but mainly we have to watch what is happening now and see the opportunities and the solutions are available to make this improving like daily, because the way it is, it's terrible. It's a mess. Like the people are making security by this misinformation, and this is the worst part, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and again, I'm just going to go back. Those are, and that brings us back to the discussion we were talking about earlier, where we've got to get the marketing and IT teams playing with each other and understanding that at the end of the day, we need to break down these internal corporate silos, because it's not about the operations. It's about, it is about operational activities in the company, but it's about operational efficiencies that need to be put in place so that we can have that clear, consistent, frictionless experience, which we know we need to have with and for our customers, regardless of the channel they're choosing to interact with us on.
Great. So, well, let's move to my favorite part, in which we have the chance to interact with the amazing audience. Okay, we have plenty of questions here. I'm going to choose some of them. Okay, let's start with Alfredo Jones. How do you think payments plus messaging can help to fill the gap in places, regions where cash is still dominant? Can you give your insights or provide cases? Who would like to start, guys?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, not to solution on the fly, but I tend to do so. I could think you could build a customer experience in the way of, please make your transaction and then come to this physical location to actually make the final payment and pay for it. So essentially, much like what's the term you use in retail, where you're basically you're paying it forward. You're basically putting it on layaway, right? You're essentially buying the product, and you're putting it on layaway until the person comes up and actually completes the physical transaction with their cash. That could be one possible implementation of that, and I'm sure there's many others.
Yeah, the cash system, there has been several solutions that allow you to have, let's call it a virtual wallet. Like a lot of actually operators are introducing the concept of digital wallets, where you can introduce a mobile wallet or a cash wallet, if you want to call it, where you deposit money, whether it's your bank or it's your cell phone mobile operator or any of these third-party service providers, where in a cash transaction, you actually pay in cash, they give you the currency in a digital wallet where you can use it with a lot of these digital channels. So those solutions exist. A lot of operators in a lot of regions of the world are investing heavily to offer these services. And third-party providers are also doing the same way to offer you that digital wallet to transform that cash market into a digital world where you can transact digitally without having to have a credit card or so on.
Yeah, the only thing I would add too is when you just think about that transition, and the digital wallet is a great way to do that. In a lot of these cash-dependent regions, the OTT messaging apps are really dominant. And so it's kind of like an easy transition to use that platform versus other platforms like traditional banks and things that they're not being utilized. It's harder to get someone to adjust from going cash to like a physical bank. Whereas I'm already utilizing this app, this service. If there's a virtual wallet, that's kind of that intermediary. It's a shorter gap to fill than the first example.
Yeah, and again, those are great examples. But I think part of the challenge we're facing as we increasingly digitize our world is one of surveillance capitalism, right? And there are times where I want to be anonymous, where I want to use cash, where I don't want to leave that digital footprint. And it's going to be really interesting to think about how we address that in this increasingly digitized world.
I guess real quick, the only question I'd ask about that though is if a company let you pay cash and do the layaway model, it would still be record of your transaction. If you're buying anything online, there's still transactional data that can be monitored.
No, there is.
Unless we come up, yeah. I get your point completely.
Unless we come up with something different, right? I mean, even the fact that I'm signaling that I want that product is a potential surveillance capitalistic situation or issue.
It goes back to your point earlier about the behavioral, the buying cycles, everything that you're doing, all of that data separate of the identity piece is important to also keep private.
Correct.
May I offer an example? I was visiting, I'm in Brazil right now, and in Brazil, the pharmacies are really interesting. They ask the social security number in case CPF for all the customers. And it's the most private information that an individual has. And if you go to a pharmacy in Brazil, you can just stay there in the line and listen all the CPFs, the social security number of everybody. They say aloud for everyone. It's really a crazy situation. Just so you guys know what we are proposing to change the identification and what is really happening in many countries, even in Brazil, that it's a big country in Latin America right now.
Great. Let's address the next question. In terms of trust in mobile payments, who in the value chain is responsible for building customer trust? Brands, banks, messaging providers, or operators? What do you think, guys?
Well, I'll try to answer that. I think it's not a one answer that fits all. I think it really depends on the channel. So if you look at OTT channels, they're not regulated the same way as banks or operators are regulated. So the verification of the brand and the customer really falls on the OTT provider to do that. But if you look at operators, they have regulatory requirements and so on. So they have to comply with some of these, all these regulations really within their region to verify the identity of the customer that's signing up for the service, and also to verify the identity of the enterprise doing business over that operator channel. So it's really up to the answer is different based on the channel that is selected. It's not a one answer that fits all, unfortunately, but it really depends on the regulation that is imposed on that industry.
Ramy, that's a great answer there. And to that point, I would say everyone is responsible for building trust.
I agree, Mike.
And where the trust matters really depends on where you sit. So if you're the credit card company, you want to trust that the retailer knows who your person is, and the bank's there. If you're the regulator, you want to make sure that the systems can trust that individual, etc. I think at the end of the day, the most important place where trust needs to sit is with the consumer, is with the user, and they need to trust that they can make a successful private experience, and that their products are going to show up and they're going to get what they bought, and it's going to meet their terms of service and their privacy and their expectations of that experience, that their information is not going to be defrauded in any way. And again, therefore, who's responsible for that trust? Everyone, but who's ultimately responsible is the brand. Because anywhere in that chain, even without necessarily the fault of the brand, it's the brand that's going to take the hit. Because if that person has a poor experience, they're never going to come back to that brand. So the brand has the ultimate responsibility of trust.
And just to add on that, I think the channel providers are doing a lot of work and investment in that area to build that trust right now. We've seen that with RCS when they introduced the verified checkmark. We've seen that with WhatsApp with the verified checkmark, Apple, same thing. So we're seeing a lot of investment in that area that gives that customer the trust that they're talking to the brand that they're really talking to. It's not just Ramy sitting on his computer somewhere in a dark room and signing up to say, I'm Citibank, start transacting with me, right? So there's a lot of verification and protocols being put in place to make sure that level of trust starts to appear. And the users have been really good at adopting and recognizing that verified check mark to make sure that it's there when they're talking to the enterprises, really around important transactions.
Yeah, and again, that's great for that transactional moment within the messaging. But even before then, do I trust this site? Does it feel right? Is the brand presenting in that messaging context content that makes me think about, yeah, I can trust this experience and I'm going to be able to get it. And I'm going to do a shameless plug for the MEF, but we have just completed about 4 months ago, the 7th annual MEF trust study that actually looked at people's levels of trust at the intersection of privacy, personal information, and trust worldwide. For MEF members, it's free to download. For non-members, they can go ahead and get the executive summary of it. But one of the key things to realize is if the consumer is not trusting you in that environment, what do? They walk and they go to somebody else and you've lost the revenue. So it's really important that you get this right.
Well, we have 5 minutes left, so we can take one last question. And it's aligned to the last one. You think customers are clear on the difference between privacy and security? What do you think? We can start with Sean.
No, we've actually talked about this in our prep discussion, that a lot of times people just blur the lines between the two and just jumble it all into they think it's one thing. And they're definitely two separate things. I think Michael did a great job of giving a good example of the differences in the very beginning. And so I think that's just a consumer awareness piece that the brands need to do to understand that what they're doing on their end is also securing the customer, because they're making sure that nobody is accessing their data, their identity unjustly. On the privacy side, like what you're doing and the things in your behaviors and transactions and stuff are protected for just you. Again, two separate things. It's around protecting what's happening and making sure only the right people have access to that data. I don't know, Michael, if you have anything to add to that.
No,
You're the expert.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, research is proven that we all have this kind of concept of the privacy paradox. We're concerned for our privacy. We have been for decades. But when the rubber hits the road, we will forego security and privacy for that short-term value and convenience. I was having a really great conversation with Julian Ranger, the CEO of DigiMe and a former MEF board member yesterday, video to be coming out shortly, where he points out, aptly so, that at the end of the day, what people want is utility. And in the context of the conversation we're having today, the utility is a seamless, frictionless, trusted transaction. And it's
Perfect.
upon every business and upon every business in the chain to be able to enable that and provide that to the customers. Like Ipification is one of the key players within that chain to be able to make that happen, as are all of us here. So at the end of the day, do people care? The answer is they're concerned. They don't want to care.
Not really.
They don't want to put their headspace into it. And when they have to care, let me answer it another way. When they have to care, we failed.
Something is wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. When they have to care, something broke in the system. So we need to work on that. But having said that, and the last point I want to put onto it, we've been talking about the business quite a bit and putting so much responsibility and accountability on industry, which I believe a significant amount is there. But consumers also have to take a certain amount of accountability and authority. They need to adopt password managers. They need to be using alias email solutions. They need to be using ad blockers in an appropriate context. They need to be leveraging and adopting personal data stores and other privacy protection steps in order to take authority and accountability for themselves. Because at the end of the day, they are the only ones that can and should be protecting themselves, because no one else can really take on that authority or liability for them. So I think there is a role for harkening back to the MEF study that we just talked about, consumers have said, I want to protect myself. I don't know how, right? So we need to be educating people on how to take the appropriate steps to do so.
Michael, I'll also add to that is that enterprises should really look at the channels that they're using in terms of suitability for the use cases. Like, I wouldn't want to transact with my bank on social media, for example. I would like to transact with my bank on what I perceive or the bank perceives as a secure channel. right? So it's really secure and private, like you said, are two different things. Security is the security of the channel that we're using. Privacy is more of privacy. I don't want the bank to suddenly be my balance is posted on Facebook. That's I don't think something that anyone will be happy to see happen, and or targeted by a different bank because your balance is a certain number. That's really a lot of the things that an enterprise really needs to consider when they're working on selecting some of these digital channels. Is this suitable for the use case that I'm working with or trying to deliver to our customers?
And again, the key point, there's two kinds of suitability there. There's the technical suitability, there's the privacy centricity suitability, and that will vary by age groups, right? Some younger people may be happy with that experience of, and some people in terms of like the social payment methods, hey, I just paid my friend so many dollars. That's happening, and some people love it. Personally, I don't think it's anybody's business, but that's me. Maybe it just signals me as being old. So, and then there's the security issue. So there's really, at the end of the day, what this is ultimately going to take for a business to be successful in performing this is, I think, applying that agile methodology where you're bringing all of the constituents into your organization to be able to figure this out, because it's going to take IT and legal and compliance and your payment providers and your partners and your security players to be able to do this right frictionlessly so that you can serve your connected individual.
Okay, guys, I think the time is over. It was a great discussion. I learned a lot from all of you guys. Well, thank you to the audience for all the questions. We had many of them, and I hope that we can share with you guys, maybe to reply to these people. Thank you for your time and for your insight, and to the Mobile Ecosystem Forum. Congratulations, guys. It was a great opportunity to share these cutting-edge technologies to the companies and professionals who are interested in this topic, and I'm pretty sure that this is gonna help us to boost the digital transformation that we need in the region. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.